Atlanta, John, thanks. All right, let's bring in Mark Eiglarsh, criminal defense attorney, and Mercedes Colwin, Fox News legal analyst. So the question before the jury is cunning con man or grieving father and husband? Mercedes, why don't you lead us off here?
Well, I mean, certainly the big lie is going to be the biggest challenge to the defense. The fact that when he was asked where he was the night of the murders and he lied to investigators, and by the way, that's a lie that perpetuated for months. That means he didn't disclose the truth to his friends, his family, to law enforcement that had continued to speak to him about his whereabouts. And when confronted at the trial for the first time, that, by the way, that's your voice on that video, and that videotape took place minutes before Paul and Maggie were murdered, and that's when he had to embrace the lie, take the stand and say, yes, I lied, but I lied because I have this, I'm an addict, and it was the opiates that made me lie. It doesn't make any sense. It's what they say in the Latin term, falsus in unum, falsus in omnibus. False in one thing, false in everything. And that's really what the prosecutor should have done, is embrace that big lie and said only a guilty individual would have lied about the whereabouts of where they were the night the murders took place. And that's it. And not infuse this whole theory about, well, the wagons were circling, and that's why he had to go, and that's why he murdered his family. It doesn't make sense. Just stick with the lie. Much better.
Well, Mark, what do you think, Mark? Grieving husband and father or cunning con man?
All right. Well, first, I agree with everything Mercedes just said in English and Latin. But let's just make one thing clear: the prosecutors did a phenomenal job of proving this case 100% beyond all doubt that he probably did it. And as we all know from many high-profile disappointment cases, that ain't enough. And one of the things that the jurors are wrestling with, that the defense hammered home brilliantly in closing, is the lack of physical evidence. They've proven that he's a liar, that he's a thief, that he's a drug addict, but not that he's David Copperfield. He can't make all that physical evidence disappear. In fact, as we all sit here, we still don't know what he did. So if he did shower it off, or he did hose himself down, for every action, there's a reaction. Where is that evidence? Why didn't they get into the drain? Why didn't they get on the floor and get particles? It's not there. And I'll add to it, too, that videotape, which was the most compelling piece of evidence for the prosecution, clearly now turns out to be the best piece of evidence for the defense. 1 minute you hear them talking about Bubba the dog possibly catching a chicken, and then minutes later he chooses to execute his wife and his son, who he allegedly loves more than life itself. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think that he's a real sociopath to be able to pull that off. As we remember from another high-profile murder case back in the 1990s, the defense very meticulously tore apart the investigative skills of the Los Angeles County Police Department and the prosecution, and O.J. Simpson walked free. Jim Griffin tried to do the same thing, saying that the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division really screwed it up. Listen to what he said. Call for number 2 here.
We believe that we've shown conclusively that SLED failed miserably in investigating this case. And had they done a competent job, that Alec would have been excluded from that circle a year ago, 2 years ago.
So Mark alluded to this just a moment ago. Mercedes, did Jim Griffin effectively cast doubt on the investigation, saying that so many things fell through the cracks here or were not investigated that we can't be sure who the murderer was?
You know, it's so funny, and I think exactly right. There is that, obviously, this glimmer of reasonable doubt, and you feed it through how many experts there were and the fact that they just fell short of the standards that are usually done. Apparently, there weren't x-rays done of the brain of Paul, and certain things that were missing in the autopsy, and they're just going to hang their hat on it. But that's where the reasonable doubt can flow in. You just need one juror to say, I just don't believe it. I don't buy that he killed his family. And that would be enough for a hung jury. So, yes, it is definitely a page out of most defense attorneys' playbook. Start attacking the gathering of the evidence.
And what about this thing, Mark, that Jim Griffin raised toward the end there, where he said, well, you know, Paul was known as the little investigator in the house, and, you know, he discovered where Alex Murdaugh was keeping his drugs, and he confronted him about it. Well, what happens if Paul confronted Alex, drug dealer, and said, I'm really upset at you, I'm going to expose you, and maybe it was the drug dealer who took him and his mom out? I mean, they're throwing all of this stuff up into the air.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes. But it was brilliant, and it was actually objected to by the prosecution because pure speculation, and there's no evidence of it. And then the judge overruled it, or no, sustained it. Brilliant lawyering to suggest anything is possible, and they didn't prove, I think, that somehow that there's no other possibility that anyone else could have done this.
All right. Well, we will see which way the jury goes after they get the charge, which should be pretty soon, I would think. Mark Eiglarsh, Mercedes Colwin. Great to get your take on things to kick us off. Appreciate it. Jackie?
Thanks, John. All right, prominent House Republicans now demanding to know more about the